Everybody should mute.
Yep. All right. Good evening, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot on the table tonight. My name is Ben Hunkler, and I'm an organizer with Concerned Ohio River Residents. And we'd really like to thank you for coming tonight to our conference, which we're calling A Better Vision for the Valley. As you're coming in, if you'd like to put your name and where you're calling in from in the chat, we'd love to hear from you and to hear where you're calling in from. This conference is intended to bring conversations about economic development out into the community, where we can discuss sustainable alternative ideas together and come forward with a better vision. I'd like to thank our partners who helped organize this event tonight. Heather Haar from the League of Women Voters, Kelly Yagatich from the Climate Reality Project, Jill Hunkler from Concerned Ohio River Residents, Leah Harper from Freshwater Accountability Project, and all of our presenters, whom I'll run through in a minute. And this is our agenda for this evening. So we're going to start with a few presentations from our speakers. The first of whom is Sean O'Leary, a senior researcher at the Ohio River Valley Institute. We have Annie Rouse from Think Hempy Thoughts, Jeffrey Morris from Roxby Development, and Vincent DeGeorge from Grow Ohio Valley. After we're finished with those presentations, we'll roll into a facilitated Q&A section where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions of each of our panelists. But we'd also like you to, we'd also invite you rather to pose your questions in the chat as those presentations are ongoing. And once we get to this Q&A section, Kelly and I will take your questions and pose them to each of our presenters. And lastly, we'll close with a 30-minute community discussion during which we'd love to hear from you, hear your ideas, your thoughts about what's been discussed here at tonight's conference. And if you're calling in on the phone tonight and don't have access to the chat, there is a technical way to raise your hand, and that will put you in the queue to ask a question once you're ready for that. So to raise your hand, you dial *9, and that will place you in the queue. And once you're ready to speak, you'll dial *6. And I'll repeat that again once we're ready to start the Q&A session. Lastly, I'm going to paste a form in the chat here in just a second that asks you a few questions about the event tonight. We want to hear from you about what you learned during this presentation, what you're interested in pursuing as a community, and how you'd like to stay involved, be that through receiving email updates or participating in working groups to help implement and carry through ideas that are discussed this evening. And lastly, I just want to let everyone know that we are recording tonight's conference. You don't have to keep your video on if you wouldn't like to be seen during the recording, but we just want to document this event for later reference. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jill Hunkler of Concerned Ohio River Residents, who's going to start us off tonight.
Good evening, everyone. It's a beautiful night here in southeastern Ohio, and I just have to take a moment to honor this land. And as I was driving around this earlier today, the phlox, the purple phlox and the white phlox, the buttercups, I mean, it's just a bloom and so beautiful here. So I'm grateful to be here tonight and enjoying this sacred land. And I wanted to start out by saying that our first Better Vision conference was very inspirational and was organized by Freshwater Accountability Project, the Pennsylvania League of Women Voters, the Ohio Valley Environmental Coalition, Climate Reality, and Concerned Ohio River Residents. And many Ohio Valley residents attended that event, as well as representatives from environmental groups. We had impactful speakers that shared their knowledge about sustainable alternatives to fossil fuel development, including ideas generated on how to move forward, creating renewable energy economies and regenerative agricultural development for a brighter and healthier future for the Ohio Valley. Patricia DeMarco was our keynote speaker, and she discussed her book, Choosing a Sustainable Pathway for Our Future. She stated that regenerative agriculture and renewable energy can improve not just the environment, but people's everyday lives. Saving the environment and saving jobs because our economies depend on nature for filtering our water and providing oxygen and all the essentials of a healthy and a sustainable life. After the speakers enlightened us, we formed groups and began visioning what we could see for a brighter future for the Valley. And each group shared their vision with the rest. Hemp cultivation and processing was a major part of the envisioned future. We hoped that the Dilly's Bottom site proposed for the PTTG cracker plant would instead be a hemp growing and processing site. We agreed upon the importance of securing healthy and locally grown food, and we saw great potential to do so in this region. The abandoned factories on both sides of the river we envisioned as greenhouses. A better vision, of course, is needed in the Ohio Valley. The continued exploitation of our natural resources by the fossil fuel industry will result in an environmental and public health crisis. We need a diversified economy, not one dependent on polluting boom and bust industries. Fortunately, I remember when small town America was still thriving. My hometown of Barnesville, there were corner markets, locally owned shoe, clothing, and variety stores on Main Street. There were bakeries and restaurants as well. We had a glass factory, a clothing factory, and more, and even a motel. Now Main Street is virtually empty, and the locally owned stores have gone, as well as the restaurants and bakeries in the downtown area. My grandparents were even more fortunate than I was to live in a time when this community was virtually self-sufficient. This farming community respected the land, and therefore it provided for all of their needs abundantly. My grandmother Hunkler grew up on a Jersey dairy cattle farm, and her mother on a turkey farm. And my ancestors sent their turkeys to Pittsburgh on rail car. And strawberries were also shipped to Pittsburgh by the train and was a major crop for the Barnesville area. And I can remember going and picking with my great grandmother and my grandmother on some of those original strawberry fields, which are now gone, of course. And interestingly, by 1849, Ohio produced more corn than any other state and ranked second in wheat production. Southern Ohio was also a major hemp growing area in the 1800s, and they used it to make rope and cloth. Tobacco was also a major crop in the region. The point I would like to make is that our ancestors can show us a way to a brighter future. This area already has a rich history of hemp. In our visioning at our first conference, hemp growing and production was a topic all present agreed upon as a viable pathway forward for the region. Due to the current crises, including the pandemic, we collectively are facing, rebuilding independent and self-sufficient farming communities makes perfect sense. With the investment in local food production and distribution, we lessen the burdens of the pollution problems, the potential food shortages due to natural disasters and pandemics, and the pollution from extractive industries harming our communities. In days past, the local economy's strength lay in its diversity. There was a diversified economy here. Fossil fuel expansion has created an undiversified economy, solely reliant on oil and gas. And now that oil and gas isn't producing profits, employment growth, or economic benefits for Appalachia. We have to take the initiative and create diversity and our own opportunities for prosperity in the region. We must learn from the past as we embrace the advances in sustainable energy technologies, providing additional opportunities to revitalize local and regional economies through solar, wind, geothermal, thermal, and hydropower initiatives. I'm very grateful to all of our presenters here tonight. And with that, I'd like to introduce Sean O'Leary, who researches energy economics and petrochemicals at the Ohio River Valley Institute, an independent nonprofit research and communications center working to equip the region's residents and decision makers with the policy research and practical tools necessary to address Appalachia's most significant challenges. Thank you so much for being here, Sean.
Oh, thank you, Jill. And especially thank you to all of the organizations and folks who are making this possible, because it's really through the work of folks who are on the ground and working with local policymakers that any change is possible. And God knows change is needed. Ben, if you could go to the presentation and to the first slide, past that. I think for those of you who may be somewhat familiar with the Ohio River Valley Institute, you may know us through a recent study, one released in February, that we put out analyzing the economic impacts of the fracking boom in the 22 counties in Appalachia that generate over 90% of all the natural gas in the region. And you see in the map before you just a quick summary of what those counties are, and they all reside either in the greater Ohio Valley, plus about 6 counties up in northeastern Pennsylvania. And Ben, if you can kick over. The study that we did basically looked at two questions. First of all, how much it has, as a result of the fracking boom, how much has the economic contribution that these counties are making to the nation's economy increased? And also how much of the have the benefits that typically accompany economic growth, how much have of those benefits have actually been realized in the region? And what we discovered was a really disconcerting story. The good news was that if you look at the chart before you, you'll see in the little green box on the left-hand side that the counties in Appalachia, um, over the period of the fracking boom between 2008 and 2019, saw their economies grow as measured by GDP by over 60%. Meanwhile, the nation as a whole was only growing at about 1/3 that fast. And that is the key measure of the contribution that these 22 counties are making to the nation's economy. But when you go to the right-hand part of the chart and you look at the box and the variables that are outlined in red, you'll notice that the economic results, the benefits that we typically would expect to see rising more or less in proportion to the contribution, have in fact been very, very disappointing. For instance, you'll notice for personal income that while the nation saw its personal income increase by 22% over those years, in the fracking counties, it only increased by about 14%. And of course, the indicator that everybody points to is jobs. And that was an especially disappointing area, where the nation over that period increased the number of jobs in the economy by 10%. In the fracking counties, that number was just 1.6%. And then population was the worst of all. And that is, as the nation's population grew, the populations in the 22 fracking counties actually declined. In other words, what we're seeing is a manifestation of what a lot of economists refer to as a resource curse, where the contribution coming out of these counties is increasing, but the benefits, the share of the pie that these counties get as a portion of the nation's overall economy, has actually been shrinking. Now, that report caused quite a bit of stir and got quite a bit of notice, but it didn't do something really important. In fact, it didn't do two things that are really important. The first one was it didn't explain why these results have arisen. And I'm going to talk just very briefly about that. But the most important thing I'm going to say to you tonight is to tell you about another way, another form of economic growth, economic development that is actually working in a real world place that faces many of the same challenges that we're facing right now. And so first, Ben, if you can kick over to the next slide, the question of why didn't, when all that gas got produced from the greater Ohio Valley, why didn't it help? Why were jobs not created? Why did incomes not grow in anything like to anything like the degree that they should have? And the answer is because almost none of the money actually landed here. The charts that you see before you, on the left, you see per capita GDP for the top 15 states in the nation. And you'll notice that Appalachia, which is what we've christened these 22 counties, if it were a state, it would rank ninth in the nation for its contribution to GDP, ahead of some very prosperous places like Maryland and New Jersey and Illinois. But when you go to the chart on the right, which is personal income, what you see is that Appalachia would come in 41st. And that's a very strange thing, because if you look at the states that are listed in the two charts, they're almost identical. In the US economy, GDP and personal income tend to move almost in concert with each other, unless you're in Appalachia. And Ben, if you'll go to the next slide. And we can see that that disconnect between personal income and economic growth happened not just coincidentally with the fracking boom, but because of it. The lines that you see here indicate in the gray line, you see that relationship historically for the United States economy as a whole between personal income and GDP. Personal income is always about 85% or so of GDP. That's been true for decades and decades. And you'll notice in the red line that it used to be true that in Appalachia, personal income was close to almost 100% of GDP. But then when you start looking at around the years 2008, 2009, the fracking boom takes over. And you see in the blue line the share of the economy that is driven by the fracking boom is increasing, and almost in direct lockstep with it, you see that the relationship between personal income and GDP is deteriorating. And that's because we now know, and we're going to be talking about this in a report that is going to come out next month, that only about 20 cents on the dollar that was invested and generated from the sales of natural gas actually landed in local economies. And that is an awful ratio. So Ben, if you can go to the next slide. And what's especially ironic about it is that throughout that entire period when we were seeing a huge fracking boom, but we were not seeing jobs created, we saw a lot of people claiming, from the industry in particular, that yes, well, we have to be creating jobs because the unemployment rate is going down. And it did. What is noteworthy about it, though, is that the unemployment rate declined for all the wrong reasons. It didn't decline because we were adding jobs to the economy. It declined because the number of people who were leaving the region, the workforce, was shrinking even faster than the number of people working was. In other words, jobs were actually in decline. It's just that more people were leaving faster. And so, yeah, the unemployment rate went down. But what I'm about to show you is that there's another way. Ben, if you can kick over. I was asked about a month ago to testify before the West Virginia Public Service Commission, because as many of you, especially those of you who are from the Ohio Valley, know, there is a chance that a major coal-fired power plant, the Mitchell plant in just south of Moundsville, West Virginia, may close in 2028 rather than in 2040 when it's expected to close. And of course, it's terrifying people in the region because the Mitchell plant is a major employer. We know that demand for coal has been plummeting, and it's causing people to really worry about the economic future of the region. And so in my testimony for the Public Service Commission, what I did was recommend a transition strategy, an economic transition strategy to help Moundsville not just replace the jobs that may be lost from Mitchell if that plant closes, but to actually exceed it and reverse that town's economy from one that has been in decline for literally decades to growth. And to show the folks, the commissioners on the Public Service Commission that it can be done, I pointed to the example of a coal town in Washington state called Centralia, which is a town of about the same size as Moundsville, with a surrounding area that's about the same size as Moundsville. But and it also has already lost a coal mine that employed 600 people, which was the town's largest employer. And one of its next largest employers, a major coal-fired power plant that is the size of Mitchell, is also going to close by 2025. And those layoffs have already begun. Hundreds and hundreds of people have already lost their jobs. But amidst that, Centralia is doing something remarkable. Its economy in the last 4 years, during which the transition plan that was developed for that town went into place, has seen its GDP grow at twice the rate of the nation. Its number of jobs has also grown at about twice the rate of the nation, and its population is growing. And here's a little bit about why. Ben, if you can kick over. What you see in the top chart on the right is the measure of GDP growth. In the blue bar, you see what Centralia is doing, and in the red, you see what it would be doing if it were just matching the US. But especially in that chart in the lower left-hand side, you will see that the coal transition plan that was developed, which is based on a $55 million series of contributions that are coming from TransAlta, the company that's closing the coal-fired power plant. They've used that money to create a weatherization fund that helps low and moderate income people improve the energy efficiency of their homes. It also helps businesses. They also have an economic and community development fund and an energy technology fund, all of which are investing in industries that are highly labor intensive, things like local HVAC contractors, lighting and insulating contractors, people who do work that is done by firms that are local. We know that those businesses are highly labor intensive. We also know that because they're local, that those jobs are arising in the community. And third, we also know that those jobs are annuity producing. Because when you do things like energy efficiency and distributed generation, you're reducing electric bills and gas bills for now and the future. You're also reducing nasty impacts from power plants. You're doing a lot of things to do exactly what the natural gas industry hasn't done, which is improve quality of life rather than cause it to deteriorate. And this is a real world example. The fund started making grants in 2016. And for the first time in more than a decade, Centralia, which was an economic basket case, all of a sudden started seeing its economy grow. In every year since the grants began, the number of jobs in Centralia has grown at faster than the nation's economy. And that change is true almost across the entire spectrum of economic sectors. In short, we have a case out there that we can point to show that smart investment in clean energy transition is an actual job stimulator. And it's a circumstance that, frankly, is one that's similar to 30 some odd communities in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia that are likely to see coal-fired power plants retired in the coming decade. So I just want to, again, thank you for letting me talk. You're going to be hearing more about Centralia and its relevance to what we're doing. And I hope that you'll be on the lookout for our report probably at the end of June, when we'll be able to talk more about this story and how it's relevant to the greater Ohio Valley and the Appalachian fracking region. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. So grateful for all the work you're doing and for being here with us tonight. I would like to now introduce Annie Rouse, and she is a hemp entrepreneur, producer, artist, strategist, Fulbright scholar, and environmentalist. She is co-founder of the Anavii Market, an online market for hemp products, and the founder of the blog Think Hempy Thoughts. Thank you for joining us, Annie.
Yeah, thank you for having me. 1 second. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. All right. So again, my name is Annie Rouse, and I'm here today to discuss hemp and the bioeconomy. So in today's world, many people think of the bio-based economy as a new concept, yet actually its roots were established long before with Henry Ford, George Washington Carver, and other scientists who envisioned the chemergic movement, or what's known as chemical manufacturing. The idea was to use agricultural waste products, which were abundant in the 1930s, and repurpose them for industrial purposes like car parts, plastics, rayon, explosives, resins, and fuel. Henry Ford and a group of chemergists set out to make this happen by repurposing waste materials like corn husks and turning them into automotive components. Now, Ford's obsession mostly laid in using the soybean to create industrial products like the car seen in this photo, which is actually often misreferenced as the hemp car. And although he did use hemp in some of the car, the primary agricultural input was actually soy. However, almost anything that soy can do, hemp can do just as well, if not better. So there are three different markets for hemp: cannabinoids, fiber, and grain. Cannabinoids are currently the most popular market for medicines, supplements, and the food and beverage space, depending on how regulations shake out. The grain sector also has a high opportunity for food and animal feed because of its high content of proteins, omegas, and micro and macronutrients. So it's a great plant-based superfood. Both of these outputs have really established supply chains, but grain also has a less established supply chain, likely due to the high prices for hemp grain. And it can also be used as for industrial oil applications. For instance, historically, it was used as a drying agent in paints, and future uses could include polymers for bioplastics. Now, certainly not least, and one day will likely be the most abundant market, is the hemp fiber market, for which the hurd, which can be seen in the bottom left center, the mulch-like material, as well as the bast fiber, as can be seen on the bottom right corner, have vast market potential. Though currently the sector is the least established supply chain due to market supply and demand and the lack of decortication facilities within the United States. So the most important reality when it comes to bringing hemp into this new bioeconomy is that hemp will only be as sustainable as we make it. Now, in saying this, I'd first mention that what hemp currently provides, even with farming as usual practices, is an excellent rotational crop that's helping our soils and general farming biodiversity. It's a unique opportunity to introduce a new crop into the farming rotation. In fact, this may be the last commodity crop to be introduced, which makes it even more important to take the right steps to build this industry sustainably and consciously. We can see the mistakes of corn and soy and the like. So it's important to not repeat these past mistakes, rather learn from them so that we can help our future. And one way to start this off is by dispelling some common misconceptions. So first, just like every plant, hemp requires water and fertilizer to grow, and in some instances, pesticides and herbicides. Hemp also loves nitrogen, and it needs it to survive. Now, this is very important because while people think plants like hemp are absorbing CO2, this is true, but when using industrial fertilizers for nitrogen, these nitrogen inputs create nitrous oxide, which has about 300 times the global warming impact as carbon dioxide on a per unit basis, meaning it's significantly more damaging to climate change, but also controlling it means that we would have a very big impact. And one way to control these emissions is, of course, by using organic and regenerative agriculture practices to reduce our impact. So with hemp, we have an opportunity to build a sustainable supply chain from the beginning. So let's do it right. And I say that because the way that we currently grow cannabinoids is not really right. I'm sure if you are a farmer and you've looked into hemp, you've heard stories of the potential to make big bucks farming it. That is wrong. The current cannabinoid market is extremely oversupplied. This is because the manner in which we grow these crops. It's very different than, say, the European model. And it's caused a lot of both financial unsustainability as well as environmental unsustainability. And so this table outlines the differences between the European model and the US model for growing hemp, particularly for cannabinoids. So in Europe, they dual harvest the fields, meaning that they grow the field for the fiber industry and they cut the flowering tops prior to harvesting the fiber. And then those flowering tops possess the cannabinoids that are then extracted. So this was similar to how hemp was grown for fiber and pharmaceuticals prior to taxation and prohibition in 1937. And in this European method, the concentration of CBD is only around 2%. Now, this compares to methods in the United States, which are 10 to 15% cannabinoids when it's grown more like cannabis. Now, this lower concentration of CBD in the European model in the raw material means that the concentration is lower in the extract that's used in the finished products. So this concentration in extract is usually around 10 to 20% cannabinoids. Conversely, cannabinoid extract derived from US grown methods is significantly higher, around 65 to 80% cannabinoids. So when you consider these factors, you can see why there may be a surplus of extract on the market right now, because we have our extract has considerably more active ingredient in it than what European methods are used to. In addition, there is an argument right now for 1% 1% THC that is supposed to help the farmers. However, this is only going to make the supply situation worse because the cannabinoids will become more and more concentrated in the floral material, meaning they'll become more and more concentrated in the extract, which will also make it more difficult to formulate, but will reduce the need for farming at a commodity scale. Conversely, I personally believe that it is paramount that we transition our farming model away from this horticultural cannabis method and move it towards dual harvesting in either cannabinoids in grain or cannabinoids in fiber. So moving on to grain, we've seen the rise and fall of the cannabinoid market. And during this time, a forgotten market for hemp actually has huge market potential in the near future, which is the grain market. Now, this is also an ideal agricultural market for Ohio and Kentucky because historically most of the hemp grain and seed came from the Kentucky and Ohio regions. And organic hemp grain markets are extremely undersupplied right now. Currently, the grain market is slower growth than cannabinoids, but has massive market potential with growth in the plant protein market. So right now, hemp foods have penetrated potentially 2 to 5% of consumer markets in the United States. So there's really great potential for growth. And part of this growth will be seen because of the plant-based protein market. This infographic describes showcases the year-over-year growth that's expected between 2018 and 2023 for plant-based proteins, which will create about a $6 billion revenue growth. And most of this is being driven by the vegan population movement or vegan consumption movement. And so, however, it is important to provide education on hemp foods. So we need to normalize hemp in the eyes of the public so that people don't view it as a drug, but rather as a nutritional ingredient. A great example of how this has worked in the past is actually the caffeine market. So prior to the 1920s, caffeine was considered a drug. But after it began popping up in soda fountains across the United States, it became ubiquitous in every home. And the nonprofit Friends of Hemp has been working on different campaigns to improve this education locally through events like their Hemp Foods Cook-Off. And if you are a friend of hemp or have interest in hemp in general, and you have a spare $25 or $5 or however much you want to give, I'd highly recommend visiting their website, friendsofhemp.org, and donating to their cause. In addition, a new cool aspect about hemp grain is that in the past, people have been hesitant to eat hemp protein because of its gritty, earthy taste. But more recently, there have been some fantastic innovations with hemp protein that make the product more nutritional and more palatable. So innovations like this will continue to drive growth in this sector. So an example of this is actually a protein that a company of mine launched, which is an Anavii, which is the brand Anavii, and it's a hemp heart protein. And this features a 70% protein that is derived from the hemp heart as opposed to the hemp seed. So this protein, and I might be a little biased, but I think it's quite possibly the best tasting plant protein out there. And it even boasts a slightly naturally sweet aftertaste. So innovations like this will allow hemp foods to really gain a lot more traction in this in the food space. Now, certainly not least in these markets is, of course, hemp fiber. Now, this will be the slowest growth market, but likely the largest, but it will also be the most infrastructure intensive. So some potential markets for this include textiles, supercapacitors like batteries, construction like hemp wood and insulation, industrial uses for absorption and erosion controls, carbon credit opportunities, both at the farming side, but also industrial side, like with biocoal, as well as bioplastics and biocomposites and filtration systems. Now, some of these markets will establish before others. For instance, textiles are on the rise locally, and hemp wood and insulation are already on the market. Industrial use applications could be available also if a consistent supply chain existed. Conversely, supercapacitors, filtration systems, and carbon market credits need more infrastructure and data to really make them go. And the bioplastics and biocomposites markets have a story on their own, which I will touch on next. So when considering how hemp fits into the bioeconomy in terms of replacing plastics, there are two major ways that we can use it. The least path of resistance for hemp is to enter into this market through biocomposites, which are cellulose derived. So there is an immediate need for hemp fiber in the biocomposite markets, where hemp, like the herd of the fiber, can and is actually being used as a filler into plastics like dashboards in cars, as can be seen in the photo here. This is a really good cost-benefit relationship. And there's also a market for the long bast fiber in the biocomposite market for automotive paneling, which competes against imported fibers like kenaf and jute and can be made here locally. You can also use the oil from the seed to create biopolymers, which could replace petroleum-based plastics. This market exists today as well, but not for hemp seed oil. Rather, soybean oil, like in compostable ware, as can be seen on the photo on the right. And if hemp seed oil pricing was competitive to soybean oil, we could supplement soybean oil in these products with hemp seed oil. However, the real beast in the plastics market is clearly petroleum. And in order to compete with petroleum polymer plastics, we really need hemp seed oil, corn oil, and soybean oil to work together. And hemp seed oil will need to meet the prices of both corn and soybean oil. And as a whole, these bio-based plastics need to be no more than 10 to 15% premium over petroleum plastics. This means we need to increase production capacities that will commoditize the hemp plant, pushing prices down to equal the value of corn and soy. But these two markets are currently priced so low that they don't even cover the cost of production without government subsidies, which is a burden on its own. But while we all see the environmental burden of petroleum plastics, corn and soybeans also have massive environmental issues that are contributing to global degradation, like the nitrous oxide issue that I previously mentioned. But while these are concerns with hemp, we have a rare opportunity in front of us to introduce a new crop to farming communities. So we need to do this. If we do this, we must do it right. And we must move forward in a manner that allows us to introduce a new mindset, one that uses agricultural methods to absorb carbon dioxide into the soil, like through regenerative agriculture practices, as opposed to practices that expel additional carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, like business as usual. So with healthy soils, we can reimagine our climate problem, using soils as a carbon sink, while also reducing our demand on petroleum plastics by pivoting to agricultural-based plastics that, if made and disposed of correctly, could be used to improve our impact on our planet. So with that, thank you everybody for listening. You can find out more information by visiting my website, thinkhempythoughts.com. You can also find our amazing hemp heart protein on anaviimarket.com. And you are welcome to use coupon code Anavii15 for 15% off. You're on mute.
Appreciate that. I was just saying thank you so much. That was fantastic. And especially for telling me I was on mute. That helps a lot. But now I'd like to introduce Jeffrey Morris, who is the president of Rouse Development, supporting sustainable ventures in business and real estate in order to create a long-term viable society. Based in Wheeling, West Virginia, Roxby is a family-owned business committed to developing and nurturing forward-thinking projects with a collective humane and financial return. Welcome, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Natasha, our Chief Scientific Officer, won't be making it. She is in Fayetteville. She's having a few-day vacation, but I think she might be watching along. The background that you see here, Vincent didn't say, is the beautiful city of Wheeling, and we are at the top of Grove Mountain. So it's Vineyard Hills, and it's about a 60, 70 acre beautiful piece of property with these great views. And that's where we are. So I want to talk to you a little bit about sustainable development and what sustainability means to me. An introduction to our company, and then our outlook for us as a company, Wheeling in the Ohio Valley. So to me, sustainability at its root form means that it lasts a very long time and that you can continuously repair it so that it will last. I've always been obsessed with architecture because of this city behind me. I grew up here, and it's just an architectural treasure. And then I spent, 5 years of my adult life traveling through, the world and living abroad. And I've witnessed architecture, and pretty much everywhere in the world, including, some of the poorer areas, they build things to last and to be repaired and, continuously in use for a long time. Right now we have several projects that we do no new construction, and we never will. We take buildings that are forgotten, lost, but should be saved, and we try and figure out how to do something useful with them that, is not only beneficial to the community in which the buildings are in, but it adds some life and some vibrance, and also it's obviously able to pay for itself. We are not a nonprofit, so the building has to at least, justify over a long-term period of time the amount of money that we invest. Today, built new construction homes in America are stick-built, meaning, just standard 2x4 lumber, sheet, gypsum, drywall, paints that are plasticized so they do not breathe, and our buildings do not breathe. And not only is that a bad thing for the building itself, because moisture gets trapped and then it slowly decays, but it's also just, really poor form of construction. Buildings today are literally designed to fail and need to be torn down, and new ones built over a lifespan of 50 to 70 years, which I think is the grossest expression of planned obsolescence. The Mount Carmel Monastery is the first building that we bought in Wheeling last year. It's one that I had been in love with forever, and we're turning it into a boutique hotel, event center, restaurant, and bar. And then next to that is the Wheeling Suspension Bridge, which has been standing for, 150-ish years. Yeah. So we live in an extraction state, and the bottom line is our core natural resource is our architecture. It is near impossible, short of, having, because, you cannot build these buildings like this anymore without spending more money than you can possibly hope to achieve, but you can restore them. And if you do it creatively and you train people in these trades, in plaster, in masonry, in woodworking, in glasswork and metalwork, and all of these different trades, then you are able to do it in a way that is comparable to new construction. We will spend roughly as much restoring a building, sometimes slightly more, sometimes slightly less, as you would building from scratch, which it's safer and more predictable to build from scratch. But then you have a 50 to 70-year-old building. When we finish the Mount Carmel Monastery, which has been standing for 104 years, it will be good for another 104 years. So as a company, this is, how do I, sorry. This one, yeah, okay. As a company, we have to diversify ourselves in a variety of areas, because restoring old buildings with a build it and they will come mentality is really, really great, but it doesn't exactly keep the lights on for a few years. So we have to diversify in ways that are a little bit creative. When COVID hit, I had just purchased the monastery and we just moved in, and we were beginning those plans, and the world was thrown into disarray. And so Natasha, who's not on the conference, but her and I found an FDA study from 2016, which was like a foretelling of what would happen in the event that N95 masks were in short supply because of a respiratory-borne pandemic. And so we mimicked a study that was done 5 years ago to design, build, and then get an emergency use authorization through the FDA for the largest hydrogen peroxide vapor sterilization system or chamber in the world. It can do 22,500 N95s at a time. Unfortunately, because by the time we received our EUA, the shortage was less dramatic, and healthcare workers got used to reusing it. We didn't get to use it to that capacity, but it was a very good exercise, and it's led us to many other things. We invest in our people, because they're another, key part of things. And we know that if we put their well-being and their education, training, and everything else first, that they will perform, and we will be able to rely on them, and they'll be a part of the team and the family, and we have better results. And then obviously our buildings, that's the core, that's my first love, and that's what we will always do. But all of these other things are means to fill those beautiful buildings and make them financially viable. So this is like a personal love of mine, particularly the boiler and radiant heating. A lot of people, when they go into old steel reinforced masonry structures, which is my bailiwick, that's what we love more than anything, are huge uninsulated steel reinforced masonry structures, because they have radiant heating, which is the most efficient heating you can possibly have, and they tend to stay pretty cool in the summer. Last year, we were at the monastery. I didn't leave the building for 4 months, and it was, pretty hot at times. And the building stayed cool. I turned an air conditioner on one time. And then when I moved into the Scottish Rite in October, it was wintertime, we put a new boiler in. And it's a massive cavern, 84,000 square feet with 25-foot ceilings, big lofty open rooms. And it was toasty all winter long for, a reasonable price, because that radiant heat is super efficient. It heats up the masonry heat sink, and then it radiates throughout. Just good, efficient heating, and it should be used more often. And so we choose to always repair or replace the boilers and keep the radiant heating, because it's just, there's nothing better for those kinds of buildings. Big fan of green roofs. I always wanted to build a rooftop deck, and I did in Pittsburgh with a pool and on the Allegheny River across from PNC Park. But it wasn't very green. It had a handful of plants, but it was mostly just a deck. Here behind us is the 12th Street Garage, and we're going to be putting a new roof on it soon to be able to do an intensively grown green roof. So we'll put the right membrane down and drainage and everything to be able to have a soil base of about 18 inches or so that we can plant in it just like a normal field. At all of our buildings, we're also going to be collecting the water, storing it in the basement, and running it through readily available commercial bottled water treatment equipment. Not only because it's the right thing to do, particularly with Wheeling's stormwater issues and the infrastructural problems, but also it just makes good financial sense because of those infrastructural problems. Water is extremely high and the treatment's extremely high. If you're collecting your own water, which is readily available on these great big roofs, and storing it in the enormous basements, you can supply yourself with more water than you need, and it's bottled water, being poured into the toilet. It just makes sense to me. So we were founded last year. I've been in real estate development all my life. I've been around it since I was a kid, and just in business in general, and that's what I really love. And what I wanted to do when I moved to Wheeling was to do the monastery, and COVID hit, and I fell in love with Wheeling for the first time. I didn't like it as a child, but I absolutely love it now. And slowly, one by one, we started to build a real family in the monastery, and it's grown to, quite a few people now over a single year. And we do have a lot of fun. We work really hard, but we love what we do. And the one thing is, whatever you do it well and be passionate about it. Otherwise, get out. Diversified business envelope. Our current large projects are the Mount Carmel Monastery, which will be the boutique hotel. The Scottish Rite Cathedral, which is behind me. That's an old Masonic temple that is just an absolutely phenomenal gem of a building. And that was a building that was bought with solutions, not cash, and something that worked out for all parties involved, which I really loved doing. And then the 12th Street parking garage. We needed parking for the Scottish Rite. The Scottish Rite is going to be, for a variety of uses, and we're going to have a lot of people in that building. We needed parking. 12th Street Garage is right down the street. The Vineyard Hill Estate, which is where we're sitting right now. This is it used to be the Wheeling Museum. It's a beautiful view. It's right above Grove's Meadow, and we're with the Grove connection, and we're both based in East Wheeling. I mean, I feel like we're slowly evolving into sort of a one side for-profit, one side non-profit, but with the same essential mission. And, we're turning into, at least feels to me, into one big family, which I love. Investment, people have rumored that I'm laundering money, which is entertaining. I'd have a lot more cash if that were the case. No, we just have really dedicated, sort of investors that are willing to take big risks on the idea of not striking while the iron's hot, but striking the iron so many times that friction makes it hot. And so that is what I have pitched and sold, and I'm still selling it, and we're going to get there, and we're making good progress already. In 15 months, we've invested $11 million into Wheeling. We have 21 more secured for the current projects that we're working on, and our goal is to invest $100 million into Wheeling in total over the next 7 years. So hospitality, our hospitality. Yeah, the hotel. This is where we are, the beautiful view, and we're sitting on the deck that you see in the photo. Okay. This is the most recent. It's not, we have it under contract. It was an auction. That's why I was a little bit late earlier. I was down there. We just signed the contract officially last night, and I am really excited about that because that building is hideous and it's right in the middle of town, and it needs to be like it used to be, but a modern version of it. And we have some pretty interesting ideas that we're going to do in the short term, and then the long-term plan is going to be, I think, something that's going to be really special. This is the Scottish Rite. This is where our offices are, our restoration trade shops, the two that we have, sort of operational now. And it's also my home. There it is. That is the first time I have moved into a place and said I will never leave. I've moved 15 times or 22 times in the last 15 years, and I am never moving again. I will have to be wheeled out of that building in a body bag. That is the ballroom on the second floor. That's the library, and that is that's my bedroom. That's the theater, and it's just for fun. We have dinners in there. We have, the acoustics are incredible. And Natasha, our CSO, she is actually an incredible opera singer, and she will be giving a tour through the building recently with the new president of West Liberty, and she's talking science the entire time, and she gets up there and she sings PAS so beautifully, and he just about passes out, which is fun. The third floor will be photo and video studios. We have them operational now. We're going to be building a site. This photo is of our window restoration shop, which was purpose-built to restore wood windows, because why buy a vinyl replacement when the best window you can buy was made 100 years ago? Just take it out, restore it, and use it again. The first and second floor will be for food and beverage and events. And then next to this shop that you see is the restoration shop. And Sarl Bentner, who is an absolute master from South Africa, is the spearhead of all of that. He's going to be training a lot of people on this dyeing trade. So the labs and our decontamination, which we have at OVMC in the original hospital building, what's called the East Tower, the one with the sort of castle turret, and it says OVGH. That's where our clear high complexity diagnostic lab is that Tasha runs. And then that's also where we've been conducting studies for the FDA, or for the FDA on behalf of BioQuell, which is a subsidiary of Ecolab. So we've been sort of trading, things. We got our EUA before they did, and they called us and said, hey, we manufactured the equipment you're using. How did you get yours before us? What's going on? And we've been, sort of collaborating ever since. This is Natasha, beautiful, talented, and genius. One of my best friends since I was in the 7th grade. And that's an important point. One of the things that makes this happen and that is able to continue growing this is to attract the top talent. In this case, we have originally attracted, Tim O'Malley, one of my best friends from New York, who's an incredible photographer. He's taken over the 3rd floor of the Scottish Rite, and he's brought people in from New York. Natasha, we've been wanting to work together forever. She finished her PhD and her postdoc. She saw what we were doing, and she said, you know what, I want to do that. And so she came here, and she's actually living in this house with someone that she brought in, which is Derek. He's a furniture maker from Wisconsin who is designing and building the bar, and it's in the Scottish Rite, and he builds some incredible things with, old wood that is found. All right. So bottom line, we have fully doubled down. COVID made us all sort of take a step back and say, no, this is not only what we should do, this is the right thing to do, and it's the smartest thing to do. And we have very high hopes for Wheeling and the Valley, because they do have just exponential opportunity. And it's a great way to show off what I believe the core of sustainability is. And if you can bring in some new technologies, develop new technologies, while expressing your creativity and whatever that may be, you can link all of those things together. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That all is so incredible. And just seeing the photographs of those buildings, I might even beg you to take me on a tour sometime. They look absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. And now Vincent is sitting there with you, and Dr. Vincent DeGeorge is with Grow Ohio Valley, a Wheeling-based urban farming startup practicing regenerative agriculture and retooling the local food system. Vincent presents his academic and industry background in materials and energy research, community development, and advocacy. Thank you so much, Vincent, for being here.
Thank you, Jill. Give me a second here. I need to switch over. All right, I think I'm ready to share my screen. All right, can I get a thumbs up, Ben, Sean? All right. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jill, Sean, Annie, Heather, Kelly. I think those are all the organizers. It's a real pleasure to be here on top of Vineyard Hill, as Jeffrey said, but also here with all of you at this conference. I'll present today on behalf of Grow Ohio Valley. I've taken the title from our new vision statement, where local food is a way of life. And we'll be talking today about regenerative urban agriculture right here in the Ohio Valley. As Jill mentioned, Grow Ohio Valley was happy to be a presenter at our first Better Vision conference just about 2 years ago. Our founder and executive director, Danny Swan, spoke at Wheeling, what was then Jesuit University. And man, what has happened in 2 years? Not only have changes happened there, but for instance, Orvie and Roxby have come to us into existence. So that's exciting. And as we'll hear about more in this presentation, Grow Ohio Valley has grown. We've started a grocery store since last time. We've built a yurt. And we've, somewhere between doubled and quadrupled our farmland. So we'll talk more about all of those things. Again, we're really excited to be here. Again, thanks for having us. Here's what I'm planning on talking about today. A little bit of background and intro about myself as a local, as someone working with Grow Ohio Valley, but then really spend the bulk of the time talking about Grow Ohio Valley, our mission, our three main functions, farming, our market, and education, and then really talk about regenerative agriculture. Specifically, I'm going to put a twist on it because I think Annie did a great job talking about what agriculture can do for the environment. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on urban revitalization, and hopefully that's a nice kind of twist. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive in. My background is right here in West Virginia. I'm from Morgantown. We joke sometimes that I tell people I'm from Morgantown, living in Wheeling now, and apparently that's funny because I guess the migration normally goes the other way. But I went from Morgantown and followed an interest into science to John Carroll in Cleveland, to Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, and then my background is as a materials scientist. Worked in industry in Los Angeles at Northrop Grumman before coming home. And now I work with Grow Ohio Valley as their director of special projects. I do community outreach with the House of Hagar, which has a connection from the founding of Grow Ohio Valley. I work with the Appalachian Institute, with Ohio Valley Peace, and of course our own Concerned Ohio River residents. So just to put up there that is my background, really from a scientific perspective that has transitioned into the kind of community development work, agricultural work. I don't do agriculture. I support agriculture with Ohio Valley. Now, Ohio Valley, on the other hand, we are an urban farming startup nonprofit. We're here in Wheeling, West Virginia, founded in 2014, so we're coming on 8 years. And it's incredible to reflect on the growth that we've been able to accomplish in those 8 years. But we have three main functions. We farm ourselves and also support other local farms. And we'll talk a bit about how we do that. We also work in food access, what is probably better understood as marketing. We get food, especially local healthy food, to people who need it. And then we also strive to educate the community, change the mindscape around local food, because we recognize that right now, local food isn't the norm, and we want to achieve that new status quo where local food, again, is a way of life. Our vision is that we will achieve regional food sovereignty, a situation where a community has control to make decisions over their own food and the health that comes from that. Here's a nice cartoon that I like of what Jeffrey's talking about here, what we're sitting on, what we call Edible Mountain. It's the mountain overlooking Wheeling. So you can see the Ohio River here. It's the same Ohio River there. And let's see, as a little outline of Ohio Valley, we now have about 25 staff and a robust 20-member AmeriCorps program. So we're happy to be supporting a lot of people who are willing to work in urban agriculture. We have 4 great urban farms that you can kind of see on this pictograph here. We have Farm 18 under the 250 interstate. We have 2 greenhouses right on the base of the hill, 2 high tunnels in what we call the meadow. We have an apple orchard. Again, just last year, we opened our grocery store, the Public Market, and we'll hear more about that down on the river next to West Banco Arena. Our office sits right at the top of the hill. We have a little solar panel on there. And we're really happy to be in this neighborhood. On the hill and into East Wheeling, there's a terrific community outreach. And like Jeffrey there, Wheeling is really an exciting place to be. And we're happy to be here. Oh, and I almost neglected our yurt. We'll see more pictures of that. And then also not pictured here, up Big Wheeling Creek, we have our new rural farm, which we'll see a little bit more of as well. A bit of the story of Ohio Valley, I like sharing it. We really started getting our roots whenever our 2 founders, shown here, Ken Peralta, Harvard MBA from New York City, co-authored this economic report in 2012, looking at local food and the local food economy. And one of the big takeaways from this is looking at the whole local food economy. It's in any economy, one of the largest sectors. And even if we couldn't encapsulate the whole food economy and capture it into local food, what if we could just get 10%? And Ken found that that would correspond to about $35 million a year staying in the local economy. Just tremendous change just by turning that knob a little bit. So Ken brought that organizational development and got together with Danny Swan, who really brought the community development and the agricultural background. And Danny is now our executive director. And the 2 really just grew a tremendous organization. This was their first urban farm, again, under the interstate. We call it Farm 18 because it's on 18th Street. An early venture was wrapping a Snap-on truck with that vegetable wrap, and we would deliver produce, a mobile farmer's market to bring food access to people who need it in East Wheeling. We've grown a lot since then. But again, we've kept the same 3 major focuses. I'll break up our farming onto urban farming and rural farming. But again, we have those 4 great urban farms. Here you see our meadow. We'll talk more about that later. Here's Farm 18 looking down from the top of the hill. Inside our greenhouses, look, Meek has those great sprouts growing. This is inside some of our high tunnels where we'll do intensive, in this case, tomato growing. And then we have a food hub where we can process all that produce. our rural farm is an exciting newer venture. It's up Big Wheeling Creek. Here you can see kind of a satellite image on the right and then another cartoonized image on the left. And the goal here is a very ambitious one. And again, this is one that even if we don't do it completely, even in attempting it, we will affect change, is a year-round full diet CSA, or just food for 50 families. And it's an ambitious goal because most people aren't vegetarians. That means we really have to get into more than just produce, but include grains, dairy, livestock. And those are all things that we're doing out there at the Real Farm. And if anyone has a chance to do it, I really think it's our farm manager. He was working on a full diet CSA farm up in upstate New York. So we're happy to have, there he is with his pigs and chickens. Matt working on the farm there. You can see our two happy cows, dairy cows there. So we're excited about the Rural Farm. Here real quickly is our new grocery store, the Public Market. I'm going to speak more on it in a little bit, tell more of its story, because I think it's a compelling story. So I'll just put it up there for now. And then we'll touch here on our education team. Again, recognizing that right now, local food is not the mainstream, that we have work to do reshaping the mindscape around how we eat and how we grow our food. And while we do work with adults, a lot with cooking classes and things like this, a lot of that work, like environmental work, comes in training the new generation, reaching young people. We do a lot of what we call food literacy programs, letting people know this is what a rutabaga is. It comes from the ground. And that's really exciting, rewarding work. Again, you'll also see the inside of our yurt. We have a full trauma-informed education program that we run there. Again, very exciting ventures. So I'll pivot a little bit for the interest of time to regenerative agriculture. And I think Annie did a great job setting us up for this. So I'm gonna touch a little bit on it and then get into kind of the urban revitalization side of it. It kind of makes sense to talk about the past when talking about regenerative agriculture because you're regenerating something. So very quickly, and Sean got into this too, the economic transition that has led the Ohio Valley and larger Appalachia maybe to where it is, it can be summed up in this Rust Belt narrative, the industry that made America, especially put this area on the map with our coal and steel production. You can even go back to timber and where that's left us. So you can see here, they split this up into what they're calling the Rust Belt and then the coal seam. And Wheeling in the Ohio Valley is right here, crossing West Virginia and Ohio. And the consequences of that Rust Belt trajectory, there are many of them. And Sean has touched on the latest iteration of the economic consequences. And the Appalachian Regional Commission does great work looking at the economic distress throughout Appalachia. And you can see where it's concentrated. It is not dissimilar from the Ohio River Valley there. You can look at environment and safety consequences and any study, whether it's cancer, respiratory disease, the fact that black lung is actually on the rise now, really it's just striking and lasting impacts of the economic transition that's brought us here. And of course, the opioid epidemic. At this point, these effects are starting to interact. And certainly that is one that can't be neglected. But Ohio Valley really works in this last one. Food security. Again, what can we impact simply by taking control of one of our most universal needs, right? Our food. And it's incredible to see how turning that knob can and does affect not just our health, but also our environment and our economy. And that is, again, crucial to Ohio Valley's mission. At Ohio Valley, we've said that we sometimes think of agriculture and local food as a counterbalance to the effects of extractive industry, where extractive industry takes out resources. And as Sean mentioned, profits from a region, agriculture puts back in or adds to our community health, rebuilds our environment, certainly our health, and then also our local economy. So a really, I think, potent counterbalance there. Because we mentioned regenerative agriculture, I feel like we're obliged, like Annie, to mention soil health. Previously, we can talk about our founding of our urban farms and practicing what we call no-till gardening, building up a soil base. But I decided to pivot on this presentation and talk about our composting efforts, because now we have that grocery store. And inevitably, when you have a grocery store, you have produce that doesn't sell, that expires, that you couldn't donate to a food bank even if you wanted to. So normally, in almost all cases, the norm is to throw that away. But because we are vertically integrated, having both a grocery store and farms, we're able to collect that culled produce from our grocery store and other communities, and then compost that and return what is still every bit as nutritious produce, just also with lots of good microbes and bacteria in there that are bad for humans, but great for soil, and integrate that back into our soil so that it can then be reintegrated into next year's or next season's crops. And again, building that soil base is essential in just about any narrative of regenerative agriculture. I like putting up here that the composting process, it mirrors or reflects natural, what is the new buzzword, circular economies. We talk about that a lot now in the petrochemical conversation, but it's nice to know that nature's been doing this a lot better than us. So I just like calling out to the carbon and nitrogen cycles at any chance that I can get. Again, it's reusing the nutrient instead of throwing it away. Another neat kind of spin, I think, on regenerative agriculture is what we do in the city. And for starters, I want to throw out this very small project in the scale of what Ohio Valley is doing, but I think it speaks to the accessibility with which Ohio Valley is trying to work. This is a urban forage structure that we built. We have a new chief operating officer who really wanted to engage a pizza oven, a bread oven. So we built one of these out of cob clay that we harvested from our farm, and that's what's being placed on in the middle picture here. What one of our AmeriCorps members is producing here with her feet. We used old railroad ties and timber framed a roof structure, and even foraged these terracotta blocks from the Edible Mountain hill to make this. So here is the end product. Here is this usable wood-fired pizza oven that we can, again, engage the culture of local food, but using the opportunities and accessibility that a Rust Belt urban environment provides us. So again, that is kind of a small scale project. But as we talk more about urban revitalization, I do want to focus on what I think are three of our main projects, or have been. And we'll tell the story of our public market grocery store, and then two of our farm sites, our meadow and our urban orchard. Starting with the Vineyard Hills Orchard, great history here. So on the same hill that we're sitting on right now, the creek side of it, what was the Vineyard Hills public housing, built in 1937, and then by the 1990s had run its course in the way that Jeffrey had kind of spoken to in his talk, and was demolished. When you demolish buildings, you remove some material, but a lot of it is just collapsed into your basement. And that's how the hill sat for 20 years or so, unused. But then the city of Wheeling did another iteration of public housing, mixed income housing, and those are the colorful houses you see here. But we also took the opportunity in this space, just above the I-70 tunnel here going through Vineyard Hill, to reintroduce orcharding to Vineyard Hill. So that's a really exciting endeavor. Our orchard, apple orchard, primarily apple, some peach, plum, and pear, is now in its 4th year, which is an exciting year for an orchard because these little apple trees start apples. So if you're revealing this fall, come by Roha Valley and see if you can get an apple or maybe some cider. There is our orchard manager, Isha. Again, you can see these little trees. This was last fall. They got about a dozen apples on there. So similar story for the Lincoln Hill Meadows. Also public housing up until about the 90s. And then it's actually the hillside that I'm looking over right now, sat vacant for 20-ish years. And then the city very generously came to an agreement with Roha Valley. And this space is now some of our most space productive farmland in those two big high tunnels where we can string up tomato vines, and is again also the center of our outdoor trauma-informed education programs. So there we can see our yurt. So again, we have a pond that is fed by natural water. We can introduce organic fertilizers there and really use the land to again, really connect the community with their food. And then this again is the story of our public market. It is built in the intermodal center parking garage. Parking garage built in, I think, 1998. The parking garage is still there and still being used, but this window front there was at first the Greyhound bus station in Wheeling. But then again, following the economic transition that we've seen over the past 10, 20 years, the Greyhound bus station closed down, and this space sat vacant for, I think, 8 years. I think we have a picture. That's how we got it. That was probably taken in 2018 or 19. And again, we were able to find great community support, and we're very happy to, as of October of 2019, open the public market. And I think we really have to note here that the public market, one of its missions was to increase food access. The urban core of Wheeling was, there were 3 what are called USDA classified food deserts. Those are census tracts that are a certain distance away from a full service grocery store. And we're very pleased to have eliminated those 3 food deserts. The public market, its business model is set up to return maximum profits to farmers. So we're very happy in its first year of operation to have returned, I believe I'll get the numbers today, $140,000 to local farmers in the first year. And we're pretty sure that in the past 6 months since then, we've just about done that already this year. So again, just because this kind of local food, either economy or culture, hasn't been here in the Valley, doesn't mean that it's not right for the Valley. And it's terrific to see the public market grocery store really tying together all of Roha Valley's efforts in that regard. And just to conclude here, there are exciting things continuing to go on here. Jeffrey mentioned the 12th Street Garage building, and there are lots of possibilities there, whether it's rooftop gardens or greenhouses, exciting possibilities there. On the top here, we see what was the old Yamaha Wheeling cycle supply store, the future headquarters of Roha Valley. And what we're really envisioning there is a larger scale food ventures, business incubator space, where farmers or restaurants or people looking to expand the market for their local food can really get the support they need to take their products to the next level, the way that commercial vendors have available to them. So certainly a lot to hope for, a lot of work to do. But I think that's kind of the thought that I want to take you with, leave you with rather, is that in summary, you know, the Valley has the needs that both Sean and Annie and Jeffrey have spoke to, but certainly just along with those needs are opportunities. We have an opportunity to do something here in the Ohio Valley, and we think that local food can and should be at the center of that, for both the health benefits, the economic benefits, and the long-term benefits of this whole community. So again, thank you for your time, and we're very excited. I think after this is the Q&A, so thank you especially for your patience in all of this. I'll turn that back over to Jill then.
Wow, Vincent, thank you so much. I didn't realize um, how things have expanded so much for Grow Ohio Valley. And I have to tell you that my family and I are so grateful for your market and for the local produce there. And so fantastic job on manifesting that to your entire team. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben and Kelly to help answer some questions.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And thanks again, everyone, for your presentations. So we've had a few questions in the chat that have been answered by our presenters and also by Danny. Thanks for coming tonight, Danny. Great to see you. But if there are more questions, please go ahead and you can either raise your hand or you can put your name in the chat and we'll add you to the queue.
So I guess while people are thinking about that, there were a couple of questions for Jeffrey that were put into the chat. So we can kind of jump in. I don't think those ones have been answered yet. There's one question from Karen Jeffers Tracy asking, what about the toxins in old buildings, the lead in the pipes and the paint, asbestos or black mold? And so just, inquiring about how you deal with that with your developments.
Dangerous question. So as far as lead in the pipes, that's a rare thing that we don't really deal with much at all. And that usually, at least in Pittsburgh, not so much here, but in Pittsburgh, it's only really been prevalent in the actual city water supply lines. As far as lead paint, it is what it is. You go through certain processes to mitigate or encase it when you do anything that is disruptive. But more often than not, especially with masonry buildings that we do, we are able to go right over it because as long as it's not peeling or chipping or anything, lead paint is like great paint. It really is. And asbestos is my favorite one because everyone, like, asbestos is the boogeyman. And very few people realize that there are two options for asbestos. A lot of buildings have been ironically torn down because they said asbestos made it unviable. And so the building asbestos mitigation made it unviable. Well, yeah, it would. Having to go through a process where you're disrupting something that is completely in its place for 100 years, and then you're removing it, you're making it airborne, you're having to wear hazmat suits, you're having to dispose of it, and then you're having to replace that insulation with a fiberglass insulation that usually has a vinyl jacket. It's more often than not on steam boiler lines. So you go from a pipe that is this size with this much asbestos insulation to removing all of that and the costs associated, and then you have to add something like this, and you lose clearance in the basement. So if you remember the photo that I had of our shops, there's another option that very few people talk about, which is encapsulation. Asbestos is simply the best boiler pipe insulation you will ever find. And so you were able to wrap it in saran wrap and then encase it in a metal jacket. And that is also legally compliant. And that's what you should do because it's just great insulation. And why would you disrupt it if you don't have to?
Great. Thanks for that answer. So I know there are a couple other questions specifically directed to you, Jeffrey, and I don't want to only ask questions in your direction during this Q&A. But I guess we can look through the chat and maybe you can answer some of these during the discussion as well. But there's one that I thought was particularly interesting. Was a question around what the expected rate of return on these investments are. And if there is one, or if this is more of a philanthropic effort by Rouse.
Money for philanthropic efforts, really. I like to make things work and find creative ways to make them work. All of our investments are designed to pay for themselves. We have to bring people in. We have to invest on the front end. We have to essentially build the businesses and bring the people in to build, run, and manage the businesses to make the buildings work versus trying to bend the buildings to fit the businesses, needs. So it is a long roundabout way. It is higher risk, but believe it or not, and fingers crossed, so far so good. With higher risk comes higher reward, so the returns are actually pretty reasonable, above average.
And then linking that up with another question here about targeting the tourism industry. That is a goal, right?
Yeah, it is a goal. That's one of the goals. We didn't want to focus. I mean, the first project was the monastery, which is purely events and tourism. We didn't want, but coincidentally, our decon chamber that we built during COVID is in the basement of the monastery. Coincidentally, one of the board members, Brian Joseph of Grow OV, 45 years ago, he started his company in that same basement, in that same monastery, which is wild. And it's called Touchstone Labs. Where were we? Yeah, so anyway.
Tourism, yeah.
Vincent, we have a question for you from Karen, who asks what the business model of Grow Ohio Valley's grocery store is.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. And we have a few because we sell produce from farmers. And then we also have, for instance, a deli, restaurant in the back. And then we also have shelf-stable products. So we have a list of priorities that we buy from. So local is at the top of that list. Organic is on that list. Whole products, as in minimally processed, is on that list. Also, minimally packaged products are on that list. So I know that's one that always comes up. Bev Reed likes coming over, and we've got those beeswax seals for your bowls and things. But for instance, the produce, that's one that I was excited to learn about some different business models there. And we sell a lot of our produce. We offer this to our farmers on what's called a consignment model, where the farmers own the produce up until it's sold. They set the price such that the Grow Ohio Valley, the grocery store, is providing the overhead, the cold storage, a clerk sitting there ready to check out. But whether it's that model or whichever pricing model that we use, the goal is to return maximum profits to the vendor. So yeah, that's the goal.
Great. Thanks for that, Vincent. So I see there is a question in the chat, which I believe is directed at Annie. But before we jump to that, I just wanted to see both Annie and Sean, if either of you had anything that you wanted to add in addition to the things you've written in the chat about some of the original questions that were asked. And then if you don't, we could jump to this question.
Well, this is Sean. One thing that I would like to add is that with respect to possibilities for economic revival in the region, I would like to call everybody's attention to the various proposals that the Biden administration has put out there, because I talked about how central areas like energy efficiency and renewable energy are, and how they not only help generate jobs on an ongoing basis and utility bill savings, but also do wonderful things for our environment. There's also one other benefit that's really important for our region, and I'm thinking of one of the maps that Vincent threw up in his presentation, which showed that a lot of the counties in our region are among those that are economically struggling. Because of that status, the Biden administration has prioritized regions to receive about 40, in aggregate, about 40% of the funding that the federal government would put into those efforts. And because so many of our regions are ones that have struggled economically, they are part of that 40%, or they would be eligible for that 40% preference. So we're in a situation where not only can we ask utilities like American Electric Power, but we also can reach out if we if Congress goes along, at least to some degree, we can expect to see significant amounts of investment coming into the region, which gives us the opportunity to use it really wisely. So just wanted to call that out. And if you feel like putting in a call to your local congressman, please do. It's a good time to do it.
Thanks, Sean.
I don't have much to add from what I had written earlier, but I'm seeing, I think the question you were talking about, are there any federal subsidies for hemp similar to that of corn or soy? There are not. There are, though, the USDA has been open to providing different grants for hemp, mainly within the sustainable agriculture space. So that provides some opportunity for funding different research projects, mainly. The ones that were recently allowed, you had to have a university partnership that was mainly going to be conducting the research. So it's not really like at a agricultural, actually farming scale. They're mainly research oriented. But hopefully we'll see something soon, maybe not federal subsidies, but I would really like to see the government be having mandated purchases for things like requiring a certain amount of or a certain percentage of foods in schools to be purchased from, to include hemp as an ingredient and whatever their meals might be, or within military expenditures for gear and foods themselves. So I think that there's lots of opportunities for the government to stimulate the hemp economy beyond just providing subsidies to grow it. Because subsidies really just lead to overproduction.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Annie. So I don't think there are any other questions in the chat, and it looks like we're running a little bit behind schedule in terms of moving on to our discussion. So if you have any additional questions for our panelists, feel free to continue to pose them, and maybe the panelists could put their emails in the chat too, so people can reach out to them afterwards. But I think we're gonna now move on to the discussion. So I can pass it over to, I believe Heather and Ben are gonna be leading this part. You're on mute, Heather.
Yeah, okay, I know. Okay, so those were just wonderful presentations. It's like sifting through the sands to see what's valuable. And on the one hand, we have nurdles, and on the other hand, we have all these gems of industries that are already up and running, and they just need to be polished a little more. It's really shining, and we can have these gems for everybody. So, but we want to engage you, the audience. We don't have a table, round table discussion tonight because we're doing this virtually, but we want to engage the audience, a lot of whom are locally oriented here. We did get people from the area, which is great because it's really for you guys that we're doing this. And so if we're going to have a discussion, people can talk. We'll call on you to talk if you want to talk, and just talk for a minute or two, no more than that, so that we can get the maximum number of people in to be able to express yourself. And another thing is we would like we're going to continue working on this. We're going to form work groups to work on these various areas like agriculture and energy efficiency and hemp and tourism development, workforce development. And so we're going to ask if you're interested in joining up with one of these, task force groups, one of these working groups. And so there's a survey that you can access now, or make sure you fill it out before you leave, where you can, sign up to be on the committee that you want to be on, the topic that you want. And Ben, how do people access that?
I'm putting it in the chat right now. Yep.
Okay.
So
it's a Google form. and it's a simple form you can fill out. If at 8:30, you can still stay on and keep and fill out that form and then leave, even if the conversation is over. So, um, so we're civic engagement leaders, the League of Women Voters, and we want to engage you all in talking. So, if you could put in the chat if you want to talk or raise your hand. I can't see everybody, but talk about your reactions to this, or if there's something we didn't discuss today that you'd like to see yourself, or something that you agree with or don't agree with, what your feelings are about this, what you've seen today. Okay.
And Heather, Jill, and Ben, this is Leah Harper, and I just wanted to thank everyone, especially while we're waiting to see who can participate and wants to, contribute in their thoughts about this, because to think about what could happen to the Ohio Valley if it continues as planned for the PTT Global Cracker Plant, and then the frac waste facilities that could pop up along the river if the frac barging of the frac waste comes along the river. It got a little bit discouraging. I remember the first Better Vision when we talked quite extensively, Heather and Jill, and we started getting a little demoralized about some of the things that were being planned for the valley. And we had to do something like a Better Vision, and now we have Reimagine Appalachia, and we have Orby, and we have a lot of other things than what we had. And I believe Father Rich is also here with Appalachian Institute. I saw that. He helped us. We've come a long way. I just have to thank everyone for the inspiration that you give us, because sometimes it's a little difficult to think about what the future might be if the plans go to support like this mono economy of fracking and plastics, and to see the community rally around a better vision and see the resources that we already have, and then to be able to count on the Biden administration to follow through on that, I think is just so hopeful. So I really appreciate anyone to volunteer. I see people from the Mid Ohio Valley Climate Action. There's a methanol plant planned right there by Parkersburg and Waverly. I think that we can have a lot of better ideas together for an economy that's going to be a lot more profitable and sustainable. And so I'm really inviting everybody to join us for that. Thank you.
Is Corey here? Corey Campanese? I know he was here earlier. Ah, there you are. You're here. Corey, unmute yourself. You wanted to talk about your bicycle business that you're bringing here.
Sorry about that, everyone. No, I'm actually in a service call right now. So we have a mobile sustainable bicycle repair business that we're going live with mid-June. So it's based out of St. Clair, Ohio, but everything we do is based on taking from the current supply chain bicycles that get repaired, but also parts that are left over from recycling efforts that people no longer want bicycles. We use those in our revitalizations of bicycles that people need every day. We do this with an EV. So I'm driving an electric vehicle right now, not driving, but actually sitting here on the side of the road. And we actually are able to have a 60-mile radius where we're able to either repair bicycles or revitalize them through used parts, or to take them from the stream and then actually donate those bicycles back out to local charities. So we've been starting that first part for the COVID situation. We had a lot of hiccups in the supply chain, as you can imagine, but we've overcome a lot of those by really digging deep into our sustainability efforts of finding used bicycles that people no longer want and then stripping them down or making them serviceable again. So it's worked out really well for us. So if anybody wants to go further with this, I'll leave in the chat section our contact information, and then everything will be ready to go mid-June, but we're working up again for the summer season, and we'll probably go dormant in October and start back again next March. So the cycle of bicycle repairs is approaching us now.
Great, thank you. That's
Yeah.
great that you're
Thanks
bringing
much.
that to the Valley. That's great.
Right.
Is there anything that we've left out that you'd like to see, that you want to see as part of the vision for the Valley, that's a better vision for the Valley? Are there topics that we should be focusing on, types of job sectors that we should be focusing on that haven't been discussed tonight that you'd like to hear more about?
I have a question. This is Wendy Tuck from Parkersburg. And it seems like a lot of the programs have been started by someone with a pretty strong vision and skill set. I just got elected to city council and I don't have any of these do things, like I can't repair bikes. So I guess I'm wondering, who are the doers of these programs that you have, and how do you link them with policy or people that can maybe provide funding? But it's like, where do you start if you don't already have somebody committed to, like, Grow Ohio or the bicycles, or the different programs where you restore buildings? Like, if you're not starting from that point, where do you start? If that makes any sense.
That's a great question, Wendy. I'm happy to jump in a little bit. I'm going to talk about our executive director who's on the call. I would say, Wendy, that the first and largest qualifying criteria, if you will, is being present and caring. And when I'm gonna talk about Danny in front of him. When I look at Danny, that's what I see. I mean, Danny was a student here at Wheeling University, Wheeling Jesuit then, and started gardening in vacant lots when he was mentoring at the Laughlin Memorial Chapel. He's a tremendously talented person, as I'm sure you are too, Wendy, but he saw a need and just started doing what he could. And I think, honestly, that's what inspired people, and they bring their skill sets, whether that's Ken Peralta with a Harvard MBA, or, any other member of our team. And we all do what we can. And if everyone does that, you'll get people who can do amazing things, whether they're, like we say, highly qualified or not. It takes everyone. But at this point, we probably all saw, Wendy, if you're down there in Parkersburg, the latest census information came back from West Virginia, and 3.2% of the population left over the past 10 years. So that I like pointing to being here and doing our part as the biggest part. Very interested to see what other people might say.
Yeah, this is Sean, and I'd love to chime in on this subject, because a lot of the challenge has to do with how we allocate resources that we already have. And I know one of the challenges in the upper Ohio Valley is that a great deal of effort, for instance, has gone into developing the gas industry, but also to trying to chase down, go out hunting for new manufacturing businesses and other businesses to relocate or to start up in the region.
Yeah.
And one of the lessons that we've learned, and you can see this in the Centralia, Washington example that I cited, is that that's a region that has a population that's about the same, probably not too far removed from, Parkersburg and a couple of surrounding counties. It's about the same population, for instance, as Ohio, Marshall, and Wetzel counties in West Virginia put together. So it's not a big place population-wise, but what's interesting there is that they have added in the last 4 years 3,000 jobs in that region. Okay, think of that. I mean, for those of you in Wheeling and Moundsville and New Martinsville, imagine what 3,000 jobs would mean for that region. What's interesting about that, Wendy, is that there has not been a single major new employer locate there. It is growth that has come organically from within largely existing businesses and institutions in the place. And that is, and it's actually created an interesting challenge there because many people are not aware literally of what's happened because they don't have a new factory or a new thing sitting on the horizon that people can point to and say that's new business. And one of the challenges we have going forward is to work with particularly economic development people in cities and the counties and in the regions to say, instead of thinking constantly in as kind of hunter-gatherers going out on the horizon and trying to, bring back, new businesses and new things, think more about what you can do to help stimulate your economy organically. And as I was listening to Vincent, for instance, talk about the intentionality of returning revenue to farmers in the because that keeps money in the local economy, growing your economy through things like energy efficiency, because the people who do energy efficiency work, local door and window replacement companies, HVAC companies, lighting contractors, insulating businesses, these are all things that are done by local companies. And so they have a remarkably stimulative effect. And so one of the opportunities that exists for a lot of places is to reallocate some of the resources that already exist to focus more on those kinds of businesses and organizations and opportunities that are more deeply embedded in the local economy. And as we can see from Centralia, I mean, they've received in grants roughly so far the community has gotten about $17 million in grants, which is a reasonable amount of money, but it's not ridiculous. But again, they have seen a turnaround that has delivered 3,000 jobs to that community in 4 years. It's a remarkable number, and it's testimony, I think, to that what I think Vincent is doing, what Grow Ohio Valley is doing, and others are, that when you find ways to invest in local efforts that not only stimulate economic activity, but also have annuity benefits like improving the quality of life in the region and reducing utility bills and doing a variety of other things, it has a compounding effect that's really amazing.
Sean, this is Corey Campanese. Quick question on Centralia. What efforts were made as far as transitional workforce development and maybe local two-year institutions, colleges where I work at during the day? We have a kind of a weak emphasis on that at Belmont College here in St. Clairsville, Ohio. We really look to introduce something that will take either the oil and gas industry, workers from that industry, or the displaced coal mining, which is even worse.
The second biggest area of investment for the $17 million in grants that I mentioned has been in education.
Right.
And like Eastern Ohio, like St. Clairsville, Centralia has a 2-year college in town, which has been a focal point of much of that investment. And they've also done it with the local school system. And specifically with respect to worker retraining, they did something, they anticipated that there would be a challenge because obviously the coal mine jobs that they had and the power plant jobs, those were kind of the Rolls-Royce job, blue collar jobs in the region. You're talking $100,000 a year jobs, and what are you going to replace those with? And they knew that would be a challenge, and it is. I mean, it just is. But what they did with their retraining money or their education benefits, they chose to look at those workers as households rather than just individuals.
Yeah.
And so when they allocated the funding, that portion of the funding for education and training, they made it available to the entire family, to the entire household, because workers came back and said to them, hey, look, I'm going to be working, a full-time job somewhere, somehow. I may not have time to use this benefit, or it may be better spent on someone else in my household.
Right.
And by doing that, it has had a remarkable effect.
So it's allowed that generational upspring. If maybe the oldest person in the family no longer can do that, the next generation can. Great.
And
Great.
that has helped by basically treating those workers not as individuals, but as members of a household.
Correct.
It has worked remarkably well. And that's not to say that there aren't people, folks lost $100,000 a year jobs.
Right.
And those don't grow on trees. But at the same time, the sectors of the economy that have grown the most are construction and manufacturing. It's not a McJobs phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not jobs that are $100,000 a year jobs, but most of them are jobs that are $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year jobs.
Great.
I just wanted to add to the point of investing in what's here versus trying to recruit. And I don't know what it is, but there is this like golden goose, this like almost get rich quick, grow your economy fast sort of thing, where you go after these big white whales and you offer them all of these incentives and you give them, 8-figure parking garages when there are perfectly good ones that can be renovated a few steps away. And, all of these things. We have in Wheeling invested all of that without a single, the entire time, because we were a new company, we did not receive $1 of COVID funding, not whatsoever, zero. We also, didn't receive any city, county, state, or federal incentives. And I hear developers regularly, particularly in Wheeling and elsewhere with historic buildings, they say, you have to do this or it won't work. We needed a parking garage for the Scottish Rite. We found one and we're going to put a roof on it, and we didn't ask the city for a thing. If you're determined to do something, you will figure out a way to make it work.
Right.
And anyone who is saying, oh, I need this, and that, and then I need you to thank me for it publicly, or else I'm going to walk, just let them walk.
To what you're saying, there's a great parallel to that. Is one of the peculiar features of the Centralia story is that TransAlta, the company that owned both the coal mine and that still owns the power plant, which won't close until 2025 fully, it's already being retired gradually. They had received about a decade and a half ago a $55 million tax break to try to keep the power plant open because it was failing.
Right.
When it became apparent that even that was not going to help, what they did with the company's agreement was the state took back the $55 million and converted it into an economic transition fund for the community. Almost a case of, instead of going out and handing out tax incentives, that proverbial race to the bottom to try to bring in new employers, they took that same money and essentially repurposed it in a way that's proven to be much more productive.
So I want to jump in here quickly and just say, I see that George has his hand up, and I didn't want him to not get a chance to make his comment before we closed out. So I just wanted to
Thank you.
George to speak.
Thank you. The U.S. Department of Labor's occupational handbook indicates that jobs in wind and solar industries are going to outpace the growth of the economy overall in the U.S. And a lot of the products in solar and wind are imported from Germany, wind turbines, solar panels, China. And a lot of these products, like the wind turbines, are made of fiberglass. Solar panels have a large glass component. And for many years, there was a lot of glass industry in the Ohio Valley, West Virginia, Eastern Ohio. is there any discussion about bringing the manufacture of some of these solar and wind products to the region?
Great question.
There,
John?
yeah, I'll kick in. Um,
You go, Sean.
Wind is a little tough. With both solar and wind, you have geophysical characteristics with which you have to deal, and which affects the efficiency. And so for both solar and wind at a utility scale, frankly, the Ohio Valley isn't great. Now, the eastern third of West Virginia, along the Allegheny Plateau is actually a wonderful, wonderful wind resource that extends up into Pennsylvania. And in Southwest Ohio in particular, out in those areas around, Dayton and going north and east from Cincinnati, there is really, really promising utility scale solar potential. In the Valley, probably the greatest opportunities that we have are associated potentially with hydropower, and that, which is something that it will take a while to develop. But the other thing, and I'm going to watch Leah just absolutely cringe when I say this, the other industry that is has considerable potential in the Valley is green hydrogen, truly green hydrogen. And I say that with trepidation because there has been an effort by a couple of companies, the folks who are trying to put a storage facility in Monroe County, Ohio, and also down in Hannibal, Ohio, you have the Long Ridge Power Plant, who have talked about both storing and, in the case of Long Ridge, using green hydrogen. Frankly, they don't mean it. There are problems with both of their claims, but the fact is that the Valley actually does have the potential for being able to become a source of both for the manufacture of green hydrogen and also its storage.
Wasn't talking about the generation of power for solar and wind in the region, but the manufacture of solar and wind products, solar panels, wind turbines, that kind of thing.
George, I'm happy to speak to it just quickly from a materials perspective. And this, again, is just based off my background in research. You talk about glass, and that's a great one. I mentioned the word circular economy in my presentation there. And I always like pointing out what are the most recycled materials we're using right now. And almost surprisingly, people still say that plastic is among the most. We know it, in this circles that that's simply not the case. But instead, they are usually your metals. Steel and aluminum right now are just, we have whole scrap businesses. Your aluminum can has probably been aluminum can hundreds of times before and will be hundreds of times after. Glass is a real wild card because it's completely recyclable. And we've had a history of making it here, but we don't do it right now simply because it is cheaper to build new plastic bottles usually or something like this. And that's an economics problem. That's not a science and engineering problem. So, Jeffrey wants to interject.
So glass is my favorite material in the world. And recycling glass is really, energy intensive. Reuse it. The FUN system in Germany, which I graduated high school and I went straight to Germany, they have what's called a FUN system. It's a thicker glass bottle that they do not recycle. They charge you €5 with case beer, case of water, case of anything. And when you get more of it, or when you go to buy more, you take it with you and you get your €5 back onto the next case. They wash it, they recap it. That is one way. The other thing is with broken glass, materials right now, particularly in construction, are unpredictable and a real problem. And we're very much into long-lasting, permanent, or near as permanent as you can get in different finishes. The best flooring that lasts the longest, it doesn't scratch, it doesn't need any maintenance other than cleaning, is an old one that is practically never used called terrazzo. And down in the 12th Street garage, we're setting up bins to collect glass over the next year, and we're probably gonna have to do it in the community because at the McClure, also behind us, we're going to install about 50,000 square feet of terrazzo. The biggest input is crushed glass and labor. You teach people how to do it. They have a skill for life, and they know how to finish a terrazzo floor, which will last 100 years before it needs even touched up remotely. Terrazzo is basically a Portland cement, mineral pigment for color, and crushed glass, stone, pretty much crushed glass and stone. We're going to go the glass method because it's wheeling. So all of this glass that is getting broken, destroyed, everything, melting it down, further crushing it, and it is going to be about 70% of a 50,000 square foot floor that'll last 100 years.
So we're still dodging your question, George, about manufacture of renewable energy, but there's a lot of potential with materials. How about that? I know in the interest of time, Kelly wants us to wrap up, I can see. Maybe not.
So I think Jill's going to be speaking, and let's just clarify with the survey what's going on, so you guys can start filling out the survey. And the idea is to form working groups that include the experts and the public, and work through these ideas, bring in other experts, and do planning and estimate the economic impact of these ideas, and to work to get civic leaders and investors to buy into them. We can do that together.
And I would just like to say we definitely will be keeping in touch. We, of course, have everyone's contact information here, and we really hope that you'll continue to engage with us in coming up with, alternatives and good solutions for the future. I'm so grateful to Sean and Annie and Jeffrey and Vincent for really very inspirational and encouraging presentations. I actually really needed this tonight, so from the bottom of my heart, I say thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate everyone else being here. And like I said, I feel very encouraged and hopeful. And so I'm very grateful for everybody's participation tonight. And if there's nothing else or any closing remarks, but otherwise, thank you again. And like I said, we'll be in touch, and please fill out the survey if you have time, and reach out to us if you don't hear from us soon enough. And please consider joining us in some of these working groups as we move forward to bring solutions in a brighter valley to this region. So thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you.